Every morning, I'd step out with my coffee and find the same thing: deep tire marks carved into the patch of grass near my mailbox. Not a mistake, not a one-time thing. They were precise, deliberate, and repeated, like someone signing their name across my lawn with rubber and arrogance. I installed a cheap night ad special camera. It caught her, Karen Whitmore, the HOA treasurer, behind the wheel of a silver BMW, cutting across my yard like she owned the soil beneath it. I confronted her. "That's private property," I said. She barely glanced my way and smirked. "You should thank me. I'm making your lawn more dynamic." 3 days after I confronted Karen, I received an envelope with the HOA seal stamped in confident red. Inside was a letter accusing me of failing to maintain landscape aesthetics in accordance with community standards. Not a word about tire marks. Not a mention of trespassing. Just a veiled threat in legalese, dressed up as neighborhood concern. The letter was signed by Douglas Finch, the HOA president, a man who dressed like a law firm and spoke like a brochure. He was polite, calculated, and always happened to agree with whatever Karen suggested. They weren't just enforcing rules, they were writing them, mid-sentence, to suit themselves. I kept quiet outwardly, but inside, the investigator in me was already working. I started logging patterns. Same car, same path, same time. Tuesday, early morning. Every week, like clockwork, Karen's BMW would cut across my lawn, not as a shortcut, but as a ritual. Not for convenience, but for control. And once you've spent decades tracking patterns to uncover criminal intent, you know when something's off. This wasn't just disrespect. This was deliberate. And I was just getting started. It wasn't just the grass anymore. At first, it was the tire marks, deep and deliberate. Then it was the way Karen smirked as if my lawn existed purely for her tires. But now she was getting bold, reckless. One Thursday morning, just past 7, I heard a faint thud against my front door. I opened it, and there it was, a half-empty iced coffee cup, lid cracked, liquid dripping down the screen. It hadn't fallen, it had been thrown. The brown stain trickled down like an insult written in syrup. I didn't pick it up right away. I just stood there, staring at it. Not because I was shocked, no. I'd seen worse during my years in the bureau, but because I recognized the tactic: escalation. Psychological nudge, a message, not for the neighborhood, but for me: you're not welcome here. But the one thing Karen didn't know: you don't push a retired federal agent and expect him to walk away. You don't provoke a man trained to see through lies, track behavior, and recognize patterns, and assume he won't see through yours. The following morning, as I walked the perimeter of my lawn, I noticed something wedged in the overgrown patch near the fence. A small black drawstring pouch, half hidden in the soil. Nothing fancy, but something about it stopped me cold. I'd seen these kinds of pouches before, behind dumpsters, under stairs, taped to the backs of toilets in gas stations. Always small, always disposable, and always hiding something. I slipped on gloves and opened it gently. Empty, but inside, residue, dusty, fine, the faint scent of chemical sweetness and burnt foil. No pills, no powder left. Just the kind of ghost that lingers after you've tried to flush the past. I stood there silent, not just angry, alert. This wasn't about bickering neighbors or HOA nonsense anymore. This was something else. I went back inside and pulled up the camera footage, not just from the lawn angle, but from the second camera I'd installed discreetly in the gable above the garage. I'd always been thorough, even in retirement. It took time, scrubbing through hours of footage, but when I slowed it down to half speed and watched with a trained eye, the pattern unfolded. Every Tuesday, Karen's silver BMW came through fast, but there were times she'd slow down just before the fence, window down. Sometimes her hand moved, quick, too quick. Once, she paused completely for 7 seconds, long enough to drop something. And then she'd accelerate again like nothing happened. My hands curled into fists, not from rage, but from habit, the same reflex I had when something didn't line up during surveillance. That tightening in the chest, that static behind the eyes. The years fall away fast when a case starts to breathe on its own. I pulled out a legal pad and began writing. Pattern, time, vehicle, object drop, location, proximity to mailbox, frequency. All of it in clear block letters. One line underlined 3 times. Tuesday, 6:50, 7 a.m. It wasn't just entitlement anymore, it was activity. I didn't go to the HOA. I didn't go to the local PD either, not yet. I knew better than to trust a system already held on a leash by Karen and her circle. No, I needed more. I needed the full picture before I knocked on the wrong door and watched it all get buried in bureaucracy. So I went back to what I knew: quiet observation, detailed logs, and patience. But deep down, I knew one thing for certain: the lawn was never the point, it was just the trail. And now that trail was leading me to something darker. Karen had declared war over turf, but she had no idea she'd trespassed onto federal ground. The thing about being a retired federal agent is, you never really stop building cases, you just learn to build them quieter, deeper, and with fewer people watching. Karen thought she was clever, using my lawn as her shortcut to nowhere. What she didn't realize was that every time her tires cut across my grass, she wasn't just marking territory, she was leaving a pattern. And patterns, well, that's where I've always done my best work. By the end of the second week, I had footage, timestamps, a hand-drawn map of her exact wheel path, and a list of drops that didn't sit right. I knew something was wrong, but I also knew this neighborhood was playing by HOA rules, which meant anything too direct, too loud, would backfire. So I played it the old way. I called my nephew, Marcus, 35, civil engineer, smarter than most of the agents I trained. He showed up in boots and a denim jacket, toolbox rattling in one hand and a half-eaten granola bar in the other. "She's still driving through like it's her driveway?" he asked. I nodded. "Every Tuesday, like clockwork." He scanned the ruts across my lawn, then grinned. "Let's make her regret it, legally." We spent that Saturday mapping a clean solution: not spikes, not steel, nothing that could be considered a weapon. That wasn't my style, and I wasn't about to give Karen or the HOA an excuse to flip the script. What we needed was something invisible, something firm but not fatal. Marcus suggested high-density plastic stabilizers, the kind used for erosion control and off-road bike trails, perfectly legal, designed to hold shape under light soil. Not sharp, but unforgiving if you hit them fast. We ordered a set marketed online as subsurface soil aeration strips. On paper, they improved drainage. In practice, they were the kind of surprise that knocked entitlement off balance. The package arrived 2 days later along with turf staples, sod patches, and 3 pages of manufacturer documentation, every detail backed by safety certifications and installation guides. We got to work just before dawn. First, we marked the impact zonerite where Karen's front tire always crossed. Then we dug shallow trenches, just deep enough to house the stabilizers without disturbing the lawn's surface. The plastic strips went in side by side, locked tight with turf anchors and covered in a fresh layer of soil. By noon, the yard looked untouched, but underneath? It was ready. Marcus stood back, hands on hips. "You sure this'll hold up?" I nodded. "Won't hurt her, but it'll rattle her ride." And just to seal the deal, I staged the scene with intent: open bags of lawn care materials left near the porch, an aeration guide clipped to the mailbox, and a roll of survey tape dangling from the fence. We weren't just building a trap. We were building plausible deniability. 2 days later, it happened. 6:50, 7 a.m. I watched through the window, same cup of coffee in hand. The silver BMW approached like always slow, then a sudden turn onto my grass. Then, thunk. A clean, satisfying jolt. The front wheels dipped, the suspension groaned. She slammed on the brakes, then reversed out with a jerk that sprayed dirt halfway up the sidewalk. I didn't smile, not yet. I just took a slow sip and waited. Later that afternoon, I received a new letter from the HOA. Complaint: improper landscaping elevation creating vehicular hazard. I responded with a full documentation packet meticulously organized and labeled. Invoice for soil aeration strips. Zoning compliance diagram. Certificate of non-invasive infrastructure design. Photos of the lawn, showing nothing but smooth grass. And right on top, clipped with precision, a note that read, Proactive lawn care in line with community beautification goals. I copied the HOA board, the zoning department, and even included Karen's name on the CC line, not out of spite, out of transparency. You see, I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was trying to stop someone. And if Karen thought her position, her car, or her HOA title gave her the right to drive over my life like it didn't matter, she was about to learn what happens when a man with nothing to prove decides it's time to prove a point. It happened exactly as I expected, though. I'll admit, hearing the sound in real time was even more satisfying than I imagined. 6:57 a.m. sharp. The familiar purr of Karen's BMW approached like a storm you could smell before it broke. She turned off Sycamore Lane, wheeled onto the curve of my grass like she had done a dozen times before, like she owned it. Then it came. Thunk. A deep, metallic jolt, a sharp bounce. The front end of her car dipped suddenly, the undercarriage scraped against the hidden ridge below, and the engine let out a sputtered growl. I watched through the blinds as she slammed the brakes and yanked the wheel in reverse. Dirt flew, her tires spun, and she peeled out like a teenager caught sneaking out after curfew. But this time, she didn't wave. No smug smile, just panic. The trap had worked. That same afternoon, the HOA responded with remarkable speed. A letter, hand-delivered by a neighborhood volunteer, stamped with urgency. Mr. Briggs, it has come to our attention that your recent landscaping changes have created an unsafe elevation affecting neighborhood vehicular access. We request that you submit a leveling plan within 5 business days. Failure to do so may result in fines or formal citation. I chuckled before I even finished reading it. Within the hour, I had my reply in the outgoing mail slot complete with full documentation. The invoice for the aeration strips, a zoning compliance diagram showing perfect slope ratios, the manufacturer's certificate labeling the installation as non-invasive soil stabilization, and a series of photos showing nothing above ground except clean, unbroken grass. And, of course, I added my usual finishing touch. Proactive lawn maintenance in compliance with Section 12B of the HOA guidelines. I K'd every board member, including Karen. But this time, that wasn't the only thing I sent out. That morning, after the jolt, after the grass had been torn and the engine had groaned, I opened a different email draft tone I had quietly prepared over the last 10 days. I attached several video clips. Footage of Karen driving across my property, with timestamps. Slowed footage of her window rolling down just before the fence. The moment a small dark object dropped near the edge of my lawn. And a close-up of the pouch I'd recovered with residue still visible in the lining. Then I addressed it to Special Agent Darius Colton, retired DEA, now working with a federal task force out of Fresno. We'd worked together on a joint operation back in 1993 meth labs in Arkansas. We'd kept in touch, not regularly, but when the job called for it, he always picked up. Subject line: possible residential drop, point activity, private footage enclosed. I didn't editorialize, didn't accuse, just wrote. Not sure what I'm looking at yet, but the pattern is there, and it's tight. If you're bored, take a look. If not, ignore it. Just thought you'd want to see what's crossing my lawn. I hit send, closed the laptop, and waited. 2 days later, something changed. It was subtle at first. No sirens, no lights. Just a dark blue unmarked sedan parked quietly at the end of the cul-de-sac. Engine off, windows up. 2 men inside, 2 still to be neighbors, too focused to be delivery guys. They didn't knock. They didn't approach. They just watched. And Karen? For the first time in 7 consecutive Tuesdays, she didn't drive across my lawn. In fact, she didn't leave her house at all. Curtains drawn, trash can untouched, mail piling in the box. No morning jog in heels, no SUV rolling over the grass like a queen on parade. Just silence. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because I knew the silence meant something had shifted. This wasn't about lawn damage anymore. This was about exposure. Karen wasn't just entitled. She was operating with purpose, maybe even desperation. And now, someone higher up the food chain had noticed. The board didn't know. The neighbors didn't know. But I did. And soon, so would the rest of the block. Because what started as a turf war had just crossed into federal ground. And this time, I wasn't the one being watched. The first flyer appeared on a Tuesday morning, printed in bold, black letters and taped to community mailboxes like a schoolyard smear campaign. Is your neighbor watching you? Surveillance, intimidation, obsession. Say no to harassment disguised as concern. No signature. Just a grainy still image from my front yard camera, a wide shot, no context, and a thinly veiled accusation aimed directly at me. By lunchtime, 2 more copies had been stapled to light posts near the park and slipped under doors across the cul-de-sac. The HOA was panicking. And Karen had dropped the mask. This was her next move: flip the script, paint me as the aggressor, a bitter old man with cameras and conspiracy theories, a threat to peace and privacy. But her timing was off. Too many people had been watching. And they were done staying quiet. The first knock came from Rosa Martinez, the single mother who lived 2 houses down. She carried her toddler on her hip and a quiet fire in her eyes. I know what she's doing, Rosa said without introduction. 3 months ago, Karen told me I had 5 days to relocate that stroller or face a $200 fine, said it was a permanent structure obstructing foot traffic. She scoffed. It was folded, leaning against my wall. She glanced down the street, then added, "You're not the only one she targets, you're just the only one who pushed back." Later that day, while I was watering the edge of the lawn, Mr. Glenn stopped by. A retired janitor in his late 80s, skin like dark leather, and a voice like gravel and honey. "I remember when she fined me for painting my fence without a permit," he said. "Color was 2 shades off HOA guidelines, said it made the street look tired." He chuckled, shaking his head. "That woman been swinging her clipboard like a sword since the day she moved in." He paused, looked me in the eye and said softly, "Walter, you're not the first, but you might be the last." Word spread fast. Within days, the whispers became conversations, quiet talks on front porches, messages passed during dog walks, knowing nods between neighbors who once avoided eye contact. The flyers, they didn't last long. Most were torn down by dusk. And while Karen tried to stoke fear, it only fueled frustration. People weren't buying her version anymore. At the next HOA meeting, the one I wasn't technically invited to but attended anyway, the room felt different, stiffer, less smug. Karen sat at the head of the table, pearls tight around her neck, jaw even tighter. Douglas Finch, the president, cleared his throat more than he spoke. Janine avoided my eyes. I didn't raise my voice, didn't bring evidence. I didn't need to. Instead, I looked at each of them and asked a single question. How many families have been fined for things they didn't know were rules because someone decided they weren't welcome here? Silence. Behind me, someone shifted in their chair. Rosa spoke up. Mr. Glenn followed. And then others, quiet at first, but steady. Stories came out like loose threads from a hem, small on their own, but together, they unraveled something rotten. Karen interrupted, voice shrill and rehearsed. "This is character assassination. This man has been filming me." "That man," Rosa cut in, "is the reason I don't feel afraid to leave a toy on my porch anymore." Karen paled. For the first time, I saw her flinch. Because her power, the illusion of authority backed by fear, was crumbling. Not with a bang, but with neighbors remembering their voices. I left the meeting without fanfare, walking past the very grass she used to drive across. It was greener now, firmer. Not just because of the new turf, but because something had shifted beneath it, something real. The block wasn't hers anymore. It never was. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something settle in my chest, not revenge, not pride. Vindication. Because the mask had fallen. And behind it wasn't strength, just a bully in pearls, exposed by the very community she tried to control. The badge on the man's hip was real, the knock on Karen's door was firm, and the silence that followed, deafening. 2 weeks after I sent the footage to Darius at the DEA, the investigation was no longer quiet. The blue sedan returned this time accompanied by 2 marked cruisers, no lights, no sirens, just quiet, focused presence. A federal warrant doesn't need to shout. Karen was led out of her home in a gray hoodie and oversized sunglasses. No pearls, no clipboard, just a woman unraveling, step by step, as her carefully curated facade began to disintegrate. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some filmed, others whispered, but everyone felt it. Something in the air had shifted, permanently. Turns out, my lawn wasn't just a shortcut. It was a drop-point part of a looped morning route Karen used to move packages, small, concealed, routine. According to the agents, she'd been doing it for months, maybe longer. Her logic was simple: no one questions a well-dressed suburban woman in an SUV, especially one with HOA credentials and a permanent scowl. But she hadn't counted on me. A man who'd spent 3 decades tracing money trails and hunting terrorists across state lines wasn't about to be fooled by a petty queenpin with a manicure. I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat. But I did watch as her car was impounded, her laptop seized, and the smugness she once wore like a badge of honor was replaced with pure, visible panic. By evening, the internet had caught on. One of the neighborhood teens, a lanky kid with a drone and a TikTok account, uploaded a clip of Karen being questioned beside her BMW. Overlay text in bold white letters. The old man who exposed the suburban queenpin. It exploded. Comments flooded in. Respect to Mr. Briggs, that's how you deal with HOA tyrants. Bro turned his lawn into a federal sting. You can't spell karma without Karen. The local news followed, then regional. Suddenly, my front porch wasn't a target anymore, it was a symbol, a quiet protest site. A reminder that silence is not the same as weakness, and that dignity, when paired with truth, can crack any armor. Karen's allies on the HOA board resigned within days. No public statements, just a mass vanishing act. The board was dissolved temporarily by city order. And me? I sat on the porch with my coffee, watching birds pick at the edge of my lawn, now untouched and still. I hadn't sought this war. But I'd finished it. And somewhere across town, in a dimly lit federal office, there was a folder with Karen Whitmore's name on it, filed not under landscaping dispute, but under criminal conspiracy. Funny thing about grass. It always grows back. But the tracks you leave behind? Those stay buried in more than just soil. 1 year later, everything looked different, not just the lawns, but the way people walked on them. The annual Spring Garden Festival returned to Sycamore Lane, and for the first time in a decade, it felt like it belonged to the community, not to a committee. There were no clipboards, no snide inspections, no whispered threats about flower pots being 2 inches off regulation, just neighbors. Kids chased each other barefoot across the grass. Dogs tugged leashes with wagging tails. Folding chairs lined the sidewalks, filled with grandfathers sipping lemonade and grandmothers laughing over dominoes. Music floated from a local jazz trio made up of retired postal workers. Everything felt free. And in the middle of it all stood my front yard, green, even, healed. Not a single tire mark. The HOA, as it once was, no longer existed. A new committee had formed, smaller, elected, transparent. They called it the Neighborhood Circle now. No titles, no fines. Just shared responsibility. They asked me to open the event. I hadn't expected that. I wore a clean button-up shirt and my old hat from bureau days. No speech in hand, no fanfare, just words I meant. I stepped up to the little wooden platform they'd set by the maple tree and looked out over a block that had once stood divided. Now it was quilted together with picnic blankets and blooming azaleas. I used to think grass was just grass, I said, but I learned it can be more than that. It can be a boundary, a battleground, a test of whether we respect each other or just pretend to? I paused, let the breeze carry that thought. And today, this grass your grass is a sign that we made it through something, and we didn't pave over it, we grew it back. The crowd applauded, some quietly, some with teary smiles. Afterward, as I stepped off the platform, a young man approached me, probably in his 30s, holding the hand of a little girl with sunflower clips in her hair. "Mr. Briggs," he asked, "did you really go through all that, just for the lawn?" I looked at the girl. She was picking at dandelions on the edge of my fence. "No," I said. "I did it so she wouldn't have to." A moment later, someone else leaned in with the real question, the one they'd probably carried all year. "Be honest, Walter, did you do it for revenge?" I smiled. Not bitter, not smug, just honest. "No," I said. "I did it for remembrance, to remind folks that respect isn't optional, and silence doesn't mean surrender." He nodded, slower than most people do when they hear the truth for the first time. That evening, as the festival drew to a close, I sat on my porch like I always did. Coffee in hand, sun dropping low behind the trees. The lawn stretched out before me, lush, whole, quiet. Karen's house? Sold months ago, new family moved in, good people. They wave every time they pass. I never told them what happened here. Didn't need to. Because what mattered wasn't the fight, it was the soil that held the memory. And like I said, grass grows back. But this time, it grows with roots.